The noise beneath the machines. The sound arrived every night at 2:17 a.m. Not loud enough to stop production. Not sharp enough to trigger alarms. Just a faint metallic hesitation buried beneath the endless rhythm of the factory floor. Most people never noticed it. Samuel Reyes did. He paused his mop beside assembly line C and listened. The massive turbine housings rolled slowly along the conveyor under bright industrial lights. Hydraulic presses exhaled in measured intervals. Overhead cranes groaned across steel tracks high above the floor. And beneath all of it, there it was again. A soft vibration, a tiny interruption in the rhythm, almost like a machine clearing its throat. Samuel waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then it came again. He glanced toward the nearest operator station. The young technician sitting there was focused on his phone while the machines worked through another production cycle. Samuel said nothing. He returned to mopping. That was how most of his nights passed, quietly, unnoticed. At 58 years old, Samuel had become part of the factory's background scenery. Employees nodded politely when they crossed paths with him, but few knew anything about him beyond his name stitched onto a faded work shirt. The day crews rarely saw him. The managers barely remembered him. The machines knew him better than anyone. For 17 years, he had walked these same concrete floors. He knew which doors stuck during humid weather, which forklift rattled when turning left, which ventilation fan on the east wall needed replacement long before maintenance reports admitted it. Factories had their own language. Most people heard noise. Samuel heard stories. The giant wall clock near the loading docks clicked toward 3 in the morning. Outside, rain drummed against the metal roof. Water traced thin lines down the tall warehouse windows, distorting the distant glow of parking lot lights. The factory felt different during storms, larger, lonelier, the kind of place where old memories surfaced without permission. Samuel pushed his cleaning cart between 2 assembly platforms. His knees ached. His back reminded him of every year he had spent lifting, bending, carrying, and working jobs that paid enough to keep life moving, but never enough to get ahead. He stopped near a row of completed turbine casings waiting for shipment. Their polished surfaces reflected the overhead lights like dull silver mirrors. For a moment he saw his own reflection. Gray hair, tired eyes, a face that seemed older under factory lighting. He looked away. There was no reason to stare. The years had already done their work. His radio crackled. "Sam, you awake over there?" A familiar voice. Marcus from security. Samuel smiled faintly. "Trying to be. You and me both." Static filled the line. Then Marcus added, "Coffee machine in the security office finally died." "That's serious. It might be the worst thing that's happened here all month." Samuel laughed softly. The sound surprised him. Laughter had become rare lately. After the radio fell silent, he continued down the corridor leading toward the older production wing. Few workers came here anymore. Most operations had moved to newer sections of the plant years ago. The older wing remained active, but only barely. The lighting was dimmer. The paint was older. The air carried the smell of oil embedded in concrete over decades. Samuel preferred it. The newer areas felt sterile. This part of the factory felt alive. As he rounded a corner, he heard the strange vibration again. Longer this time. He stopped, listened, waited. The sound echoed through the steel framework overhead before disappearing. His eyes narrowed. That wasn't normal. Not dangerous. Not urgent. But not normal. A memory stirred. Something from years ago. A workshop. A technical diagram. A conversation he hadn't thought about in decades. The feeling vanished before he could fully grasp it. Samuel shook his head. Maybe he was imagining things. At his age, memories had a way of arriving incomplete, fragments without context. He resumed cleaning, yet the sound followed him through the night, always returning, always disappearing before he could locate its source. By 4:30, the factory had settled into its quietest hours. Even the machinery seemed tired. Samuel parked his cleaning cart beside an old maintenance access platform scheduled for demolition later that year. Dust coated the surrounding railings. No one paid much attention to this area anymore. As he swept debris from beneath the platform, his broom struck something solid. A metallic clink echoed in the darkness. Samuel frowned. He crouched slowly, joints protesting. The object sat partially hidden beneath years of dust. Not machinery, not scrap, a narrow metal box, the kind used for storing documents. He pulled it free. A thick layer of grime covered the surface. The latch resisted at first before finally snapping open. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Old maintenance reports, inspection records, handwritten notes, some dated nearly 2 decades earlier. Samuel stared. Why would these be here? Important records weren't supposed to be abandoned beneath platforms, especially not engineering documents. He flipped through the stack. Most pages appeared routine. Equipment inspections, repair schedules, calibration reports. Then one page caught his attention. A hand-drawn diagram, detailed, precise. Technical notes filled the margins. Samuel's breathing slowed. The sketch looked familiar, very familiar. He studied the drawing while rain hammered the roof above. The longer he looked, the stronger the feeling became. He had seen something like this before. Not here. Long ago. Before the night shifts. Before the janitor's cart. Before life had changed direction. A distant machine cycled somewhere across the factory floor. The sound snapped him back to the present. Samuel folded the paper carefully. His eyes drifted toward the production area, where the mysterious vibration continued to appear every few minutes. For the first time, the sound and the forgotten documents felt connected. Not proven, not certain, just connected. A possibility. And possibilities had a strange habit of becoming problems. He gathered the papers and placed them back inside the box. The sensible thing would be to hand them over to maintenance, forget about them, finish his shift, go home, sleep. But as he stood there beneath the aging steel platform, one uncomfortable thought refused to leave. What if the sound wasn't new? What if it had been there all along, waiting, year after year, hidden beneath routine, hidden beneath assumptions, hidden because everyone had stopped listening? Samuel looked once more at the faded diagram, then toward the distant machines. The vibration returned. A little longer this time, a little harder to ignore. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark horizon. Inside the factory, Samuel felt something he hadn't felt in years, curiosity. And somewhere beneath that curiosity, a growing sense that he had just stumbled onto a story nobody else knew existed. Not yet. A signature no one questioned. Samuel slept poorly. The rain had followed him home that morning, tapping against the apartment windows until dawn. Even after crawling into bed, his thoughts refused to settle. The metal box, the forgotten documents, the strange vibration beneath the factory's normal rhythm. Most of all, the diagram. Something about it felt unfinished in his memory, like a song he almost remembered but couldn't quite name. By the time he returned for his next shift, a cold wind had pushed the storm away. The evening sky hung low and gray over the factory complex. The plant looked exactly as it always had: concrete, steel, steam drifting from rooftop vents. Nothing suggested that a 17-year-old mystery might be hiding inside. Samuel clocked in, exchanged a brief greeting with security, and pushed his cleaning cart toward the older production wing. But tonight he wasn't thinking about floors, he was thinking about records. The metal box was exactly where he'd left it, hidden beneath the maintenance platform, waiting. He opened it again and spread the papers across a nearby workbench. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the details became clearer. Maintenance reports, equipment modification requests, inspection notes signed by supervisors who had retired years ago. Then he found it, a document folded between 2 calibration sheets. At the bottom sat a signature. The name immediately caught his attention. Daniel Whitaker. Samuel knew the name. Everyone in the factory knew the name. Whitaker had been one of the engineers responsible for the plant's major expansion nearly 2 decades earlier. New production lines, new machinery, new systems. The expansion was considered a success story. Management still talked about it during orientation sessions. But something about the paperwork didn't fit. Samuel leaned closer. The modification referenced in the document wasn't described as permanent. The wording was specific: temporary adjustment pending final validation. He read the sentence twice, then a third time. Temporary, not permanent. Yet the machinery operating around him tonight was still using the same configuration. His stomach tightened. That shouldn't be possible. A temporary modification shouldn't survive 17 years. Unless nobody realized it was temporary. Or worse, unless everyone assumed someone else had checked. The sound returned, that faint hesitation beneath the machinery. Samuel looked toward the production floor. The vibration seemed less mysterious now, not because he understood it, because it suddenly felt connected to something human, an overlooked decision, a forgotten signature, a mistake passed from one generation to the next. He slipped the papers into a folder and headed toward the archive room. Few employees visited the archives anymore. Most records had been digitized years ago. The room occupied a neglected corner of the administrative wing, tucked behind unused offices and storage closets. Dust coated the shelves. Old filing cabinets lined the walls. The air smelled faintly of paper and machine oil. Samuel began searching. Expansion records, engineering reports, equipment approvals. The deeper he looked, the stranger things became. References appeared, then disappeared. Documents pointed toward files that no longer existed. Approval chains stopped halfway through. Entire sections seemed incomplete. Hours passed. By midnight, Samuel had assembled a small stack of photocopies. Every trail led back to the same period, 17 years ago, and every trail ended with unanswered questions. "You're not supposed to be in here." The voice startled him. Samuel turned. A young woman stood in the doorway, holding a tablet. Dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Safety glasses resting on her head. Process engineering badge. He recognized her from the production floor. Elena Morales, one of the newer engineers. Smart, focused, usually moving too fast for casual conversation. Samuel cleared his throat. "Sorry, I was just looking through some old records." Elena glanced at the papers. "Most people avoid this room. Most people probably have better things to do." A small smile appeared, then disappeared. Her attention shifted to the documents. "What are you looking for?" Samuel hesitated. Years of habit told him to keep quiet. People didn't expect technical observations from janitors, and he had grown comfortable with that arrangement. But something in Elena's expression made him answer honestly. "A machine problem." She raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problem?" Samuel explained. "The vibration, the maintenance records, the temporary modification, the missing approvals." As he spoke, Elena stopped smiling. By the end, she had moved closer to the table. "Show me." For the next hour, they examined the records together. Elena cross-referenced archive specifications against current system data. The more they compared, the more concerned she became. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "That's impossible." Samuel said nothing, because he had been thinking the same thing. Elena stared at the screen. If these documents are accurate, this adjustment was never supposed to become standard operating configuration. The words hung in the room. Neither spoke for several seconds. The silence felt heavier than any argument, because neither wanted to say what came next. If the temporary configuration became permanent, then every efficiency report for 17 years had been based on a flawed assumption. Every production target, every performance review, every upgrade plan, all built on a foundation nobody questioned. Elena rubbed her forehead. There has to be another explanation. Samuel hoped she was right, but hope and evidence were becoming difficult to reconcile. Together they pulled additional records, more diagrams, more reports, more signatures. Near 2 a.m, Elena found something buried inside an old project summary. Her eyes widened. "Samuel." He looked up. "What is it?" She turned the screen toward him. A final validation review had been scheduled months after the original modification, but there was no evidence the review ever occurred. No report. No findings. Nothing. Just an empty entry, as though someone intended to finish the process and never returned. The realization settled slowly. No conspiracy, no sabotage, no villain. Just an unfinished task lost during management turnover and organizational chaos. A simple human mistake, the kind that happens every day, except this one had survived 17 years. Machinery hummed steadily through the night. Inside, neither of them spoke. The weight of the discovery felt larger than either expected. Finally, Elena broke the silence. "If this is true," she stopped. Samuel finished the thought. "It means nobody inherited the correct version." She nodded. "Everyone inherited the mistake." The words lingered in Samuel's mind. He thought about the workers who had spent decades trying to optimize systems that were flawed from the beginning. People solving problems created by an error they didn't know existed. people doing their best with incomplete information. For some reason, that saddened him. Near dawn, Elena suggested one final step: a simulation. Current configuration versus intended configuration. Hard data. No assumptions, no theories, just results. They loaded the information into the engineering software and waited. The computer processed for several long minutes. Fans whirred. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Neither spoke. Finally, the results appeared. Elena's expression changed first, then Samuel's. The efficiency losses were worse than expected. Much worse. But that wasn't what frightened them. A second chart appeared beneath the first. Wear projections, component stress, failure forecasts. The room felt suddenly colder. The flaw wasn't merely wasting money. It was quietly accelerating damage inside critical systems, year after year, cycle after cycle. The machinery had been absorbing the consequences for nearly 2 decades. Elena stared at the numbers. Samuel listened to the distant hum of the factory beyond the walls. For the first time, the strange vibration no longer sounded like a mystery. It sounded like a warning. And according to the simulation, that warning was running out of time. The blueprint in his memory. The meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock in the morning. By 6:30, Samuel was standing alone on an elevated walkway overlooking the factory floor. Below him, the first shift was arriving. Forklifts moved between loading bays. Workers carried coffee cups through security gates. Overhead lights reflected from polished turbine casings lined up for shipment. Everything looked normal. That was the strange part. The factory had no idea how close it might be to a major failure. Samuel rested his hands on the railing. For 17 years, he had walked these floors without drawing attention. He preferred it that way. Clean the hallways, empty the trash bins, finish the shift, go home. Invisible people avoided complicated problems. Today, that option was gone. The sound echoed across the factory again, that faint metallic hesitation, the vibration that had started everything. Now Samuel heard it differently, not as a machine problem, as a reminder that small things become large when ignored long enough. Behind him, footsteps approached. Elena appeared carrying a laptop and a stack of reports. "You ready?" she asked. Samuel exhaled. "No." She smiled faintly. "Good, that makes 2 of us." Together they headed toward the conference room. The plant's leadership team was already gathered inside. Operations managers, senior engineers, maintenance supervisors, department heads. Most knew Elena, very few knew Samuel. Several glanced at his janitor's uniform with visible confusion. One manager assumed he had entered by mistake. Another politely asked if he was looking for someone. Samuel felt his stomach tighten. Old feelings returned. The familiar sense of standing in places where people didn't expect him to belong. Elena placed her laptop on the table. "He's with me." The room settled, not comfortably, but enough to continue. The presentation began. At first, the discussion focused on technical data, production efficiency, equipment stress, failure projections, the simulation results. Questions came quickly, some thoughtful, some defensive, others skeptical. One executive leaned forward. "You're telling us a temporary adjustment became permanent and nobody noticed for 17 years? "It appears that way," Elena answered. The executive shook his head. "That's difficult to accept." It was difficult to accept. The factory's reputation rested on the success of its expansion project. Admitting a foundational error would be painful. Not because anyone had acted maliciously, because everyone had trusted the system. And systems rarely question themselves. The discussion continued for nearly an hour. Evidence accumulated. Reports supported reports. Records confirmed records. Yet resistance remained. Not because the data was weak, because the implications were enormous. Then one of the senior engineers asked a simple question. "If the documentation is incomplete, how can we be certain what the original design team intended?" The room grew quiet. Elena glanced toward Samuel. It was his turn. The moment he had hoped to avoid. For several seconds he stared at the conference table. Then he spoke. "I think I know." Every head turned. Samuel swallowed. His voice felt unfamiliar. He wasn't used to speaking in rooms like this, especially not about subjects buried beneath decades of silence. "I never mention this because it never seemed important." He paused. 17 years ago, before I worked here, I was part of a consulting team. The room remained still. Samuel continued. We assisted several manufacturers during expansion projects. Temporary production modifications were common during installation phases. Confusion appeared on several faces. One manager frowned. You were an engineer? Samuel shook his head. Junior systems analyst. The title felt strange after all these years, like something belonging to another person, another life. He continued carefully. My daughter was 8 years old when she became seriously ill. The room softened. People listened differently now. My wife had already passed away. There wasn't anyone else. Samuel looked down briefly. Memories surfaced. Hospital corridors, medical bills, long nights beside a hospital bed, choices nobody wants to make. I left the consulting work, the travel, everything. I needed something stable. No one interrupted. The factory hired me during the expansion period. I stayed. The simplicity of those words carried years of sacrifice. He stayed, not because it was his dream, because it was what his family needed. Samuel opened a folder and removed the faded diagram he had found beneath the maintenance platform. The reason this looked familiar is because I've seen versions of it before. He pointed toward a section of the design. The temporary adjustment wasn't created to improve performance. The room leaned closer. It was created to keep production moving, while another component was being redesigned. A senior engineer's eyes widened. Suddenly he understood. Others followed, one by one, like pieces sliding into place. The temporary system had never been intended as an optimization. It had been a workaround, a bridge, a solution designed to exist for months, not decades. The missing validation review would have restored the intended configuration, but the review never happened. And over time, everyone assumed the temporary design was the final one. The silence that followed felt different from earlier. Not shock. Recognition. The puzzle finally made sense. Hours later, engineering teams began reviewing implementation plans. Corrections would be expensive, complicated, time-consuming, but possible. Most importantly, they would happen before major failures occurred. For the first time since discovering the metal box, Samuel felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. Outside, morning sunlight spread across the factory grounds. The storm clouds were gone. 3 months later, the changes were complete. Production paused briefly during installation. New configurations replaced old assumptions. Testing confirmed the results. Efficiency improved immediately. Equipment stress dropped dramatically. The strange vibration disappeared. The factory sounded different now, healthier, balanced, like a machine finally allowed to breathe properly. One evening, Samuel arrived for work and noticed several employees gathered near the maintenance corridor. Someone had mounted a small brass plaque on the wall. Nothing flashy, nothing ceremonial, just polished metal beneath a simple overhead light. Workers read it before continuing their shifts. Most paused only a moment. Samuel waited until the hallway emptied. Then he stepped closer. The plaque contained a single sentence. Some problems are only visible to those who never stopped paying attention. No job titles, no departments, no hierarchy, just the truth. Samuel stood quietly. The factory hummed around him. Forklifts moved in the distance. Tools clinked against metal workbenches. Compressed air hissed somewhere beyond the assembly floor. Ordinary sounds, yet they felt different. For years he had believed life was divided into 2 parts, the future he once imagined, and the one he ended up living. One filled with opportunities lost, the other filled with responsibilities accepted. But standing there, he realized something he had never fully understood. The years had not erased who he was. The knowledge remained. The curiosity remained. The ability to notice what others missed remained. Nothing had been lost, only hidden, just like the mistake. A door opened nearby. Elena stepped into the corridor carrying a clipboard. She noticed him studying the plaque. "You know," she said, "they wanted to put your name on it." Samuel smiled. "I'm glad they didn't." She laughed softly. "I thought you might say that." Together they looked toward the factory floor. Workers moved between machines. Production lines flowed smoothly. Life continued. Not perfect, not dramatic, just better. After a moment, Samuel checked his watch. Break time was over. There were floors to clean, hallways to inspect, small details to notice. He picked up his cart and started down the corridor. The brass plate caught the light behind him as he disappeared around the corner. The factory kept running, steady, reliable, the way it was always meant to. And, somewhere within its walls, remained the quiet legacy of a man who spent 17 years being overlooked, until the day he remembered that paying attention is a skill the world often forgets to value. The things that remain. 6 months later, the factory sounded different. Most people couldn't hear the change. Samuel could. Every machine had a rhythm. Every production line carried its own pulse. For years, the hidden flaw had existed like a musician playing slightly off-tempo in an otherwise perfect orchestra. Now that rhythm was gone. The correction had become part of daily operations so quickly that newer employees barely knew a problem had ever existed. Factories were like that. They moved forward, they adapted, then they forgot. On a cool October evening, Samuel pushed his cleaning cart through the main assembly hall while the second shift prepared for a production run. The air smelled of machine oil and fresh-cut metal. Overhead cranes glided silently across steel tracks. Workers checked measurements beneath bright task lights. Life continued, as it always did. Yet something had changed. People greeted him now, not dramatically, not awkwardly, just naturally. The welding supervisor nodded when he passed. A forklift operator raised a hand. Several technicians asked his opinion when unusual noises appeared. Small things, but meaningful ones. Respect often arrived quietly. Samuel preferred it that way. Near the maintenance station, he spotted Elena reviewing performance reports. She looked exhausted. Her desk was covered with folders, coffee cups, engineering notes, the usual signs of someone carrying too many responsibilities. Long day? Samuel asked. She looked up and laughed. Long month. That's better than a long year. Ask me again next week. Samuel smiled. Their friendship had become one of the unexpected outcomes of the discovery. Two people from completely different stages of life who somehow understood each other. Elena closed her laptop. You hear the news? What news? The company approved funding for the apprentice program. Samuel frowned. What apprentice program? The one we've been fighting for. She pointed toward the production floor. Technical mentoring, cross-training, skill preservation. Samuel remembered. The idea had emerged shortly after the investigation ended. Several veteran workers were approaching retirement. Important knowledge risked disappearing with them. Practical knowledge, the kind that never fully fit inside manuals, the kind Samuel valued. The funding actually passed? He asked. Elena nodded. Starts next quarter. Samuel felt unexpectedly pleased. Factories relied on machinery, but they survived because of people. People who learned, people who taught, people who remembered. The apprentice program felt like a step in the right direction. As the evening progressed, Samuel continued his rounds. The factory gradually settled into its nighttime rhythm, a rhythm he knew better than most. Near midnight, he reached the older production wing, the same wing where everything had begun. The same corridor, the same stretch of concrete floor where he had first heard the strange vibration. For a moment, he stopped. The area looked unchanged, yet it felt completely different. Funny how places could hold memories. He remembered the uncertainty, the hesitation, the decision to investigate when walking away would have been easier. At the time, none of it had seemed important, just a sound. A box of forgotten documents, a few unanswered questions, nothing extraordinary. Yet life often changed direction through small decisions, not grand moments. Small ones, the ones people almost ignored. Samuel resumed walking, his radio crackled. Sam? It was Marcus from security. Go ahead. You got a visitor. Samuel stopped. A visitor? Front office. At midnight? That's what I said. Toward the administrative building. The front reception area was nearly empty when he arrived. Only a single desk lamp illuminated the room. A young man stood near the entrance holding a notebook. Mid-20s, maybe. Nervous posture, unsure whether he belonged there. Samuel approached. Can I help you? The young man straightened. Mr. Reyes? Samuel nodded. The visitor smiled awkwardly. My name is Ryan. He extended a hand. Samuel shook it. I'm starting here next month. Congratulations. Ryan laughed softly. Thanks. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ryan glanced down at his notebook. I heard about what happened. Samuel sighed. Stories traveled farther than he preferred. Ryan noticed. I'm sorry. I don't mean the rumors. What do you mean? The apprentice program. Samuel listened. My father worked in manufacturing for 30 years, Ryan said. He always talked about people who taught him things nobody else bothered to explain. The young man hesitated, then continued. When I heard the program was being created, I applied immediately. Something in his voice sounded sincere. Not admiration. Gratitude. The difference mattered. Ryan looked around the quiet reception area. I guess I just wanted to meet the person who pushed for it. Samuel almost corrected him. The program wasn't his achievement alone. Many people helped, but he understood the sentiment. So he simply nodded. Well, I hope you learned something useful. Ryan smiled. I hope so too. After the young man left, Samuel remained standing near the entrance. Outside, cold air swept across the parking lot. The factory lights reflected against dark clouds overhead. For a long moment, he watched workers coming and going. Different ages, different backgrounds, different stories, all connected by the same place, the same machines, the same work. Years earlier, Samuel had believed his life was defined by the career he left behind, the opportunities he sacrificed, the plans that never happened. Now he saw things differently. A person's value wasn't measured only by titles or promotions or recognition. Sometimes value appeared in smaller forms. A lesson passed forward, a problem prevented, a skill preserved, a life quietly improved. Near the end of his shift, Samuel returned to the corridor where the brass plaque remained mounted on the wall. The metal had already begun collecting fingerprints from workers who absent-mindedly touched it while passing by. He noticed that and smiled. It felt appropriate. The plaque wasn't a monument. It was part of the factory now, part of everyday life, just another detail people encountered during ordinary days. Samuel reached out and brushed a speck of dust from its surface. Old habits. Then he picked up his cart and continued toward the exit. Behind him, machines hummed steadily through the night. Ahead of him, dawn was beginning to lighten the horizon, and somewhere inside the factory, new workers were arriving, learning, listening, paying attention, the way someone once taught him, the way he had finally learned to teach others. The mistake hidden for 17 years had been corrected. But its greatest impact wasn't the money saved or the equipment repaired. It was the reminder left behind that knowledge mattered, that experience mattered, and that sometimes the people standing quietly in the background are carrying pieces of the story no one else can see, until the day someone finally asks them to speak.